Hello and welcome to PCG Live. Now 2014 is, I think it's fair to say, going to be a very exciting year politically. We've got the European and local elections coming up next month, the Scottish independence referendum in September, and of course the run-up to the general election in 2015. Now we'll be discussing how all these elections will affect freelancers and other small businesses with Tom Hadley, who is Director of Policy and Professional Services at the REC, that's the Recruitment and Employment Confederation, with Simon McVicker, Director of Policy and Public Affairs at PCG, and with Alex Jackman, Head of Policy at the Forum of Private Business. Now, if you have a question for our panel, remember you can get in touch with us on Twitter using the hashtag PCG Live. First up then, let's talk about the local and European elections. Of course, they are next month. Simon, what do you think the elections are going to mean for freelancers and for small businesses?
Well, I think any elections are uncertain for business and for freelancers. These elections coming up, we don't really know what the outcome's going to be. In fact, in the next year's elections, we don't really know what the outcome is going to be. But if we look at some of the trends, there is a potential that the European elections could create a more anti-business parliament and then commission in Brussels. So we do have some concerns at the moment that what we might get out of these elections is a commission that will not maybe understand about freelance business. They may want to review employment law, and the whole environment may become less business friendly than it has been in the last 10 years. So there are some concerns there.
Alex, do you have the same concerns?
Look, I think for our members, if you're weighing up the local and the European elections, for our members it would be the local elections that really have the bigger impact on them. We're continually getting complaints from our members about the rising business rates over the last 4 or 5 years, and this is a chance for them to really try and have a say on where they think council should be using that local taxation to make things easier for their businesses. I think in terms of the Euros, it's always a little more complex for small businesses for exactly those kind of reasons. Euro being institutions, an incredibly complex set of instruments that creates policy, lots of different factions there. I'm not sure that a business vote really for a particular MEP, for a particular party, which is part of a faction, which is part of the grand complex scheme of things at the EU, is really going to feel like it can make that much difference. So for us, the locals are the more important ones.
Tom, what about you?
Yeah, I think the European elections are obviously of interest to our members. In some ways, our interest has been scarred by some of the regulations coming out of Europe. So colleagues here will recognise Agency Workers Directive, which came out 2 years ago, the biggest piece of regulation we've ever had to face as an industry. So I suppose people's perception is, what's going to be the latest offerings from Brussels over the coming years, which is why fundamentally Simon's right. What we do need to do is to try and create some sort of mind shift change. So Brussels isn't about creating more regulations, it's about driving jobs and growth. So what they used to call the Lisbon agenda a few years ago was the right way to go, where you're trying to focus on competitiveness, on how we can compete in the global economy. We've gone away from that. So I guess what our members would really like to see over the coming years is that kind of shift in mindset within the European institute. So we're focusing on how do we compete in that sort of global economy. So whether that happens or not, we'll have to see, but that's really what we're hoping for and what we're calling for.
Simon, in terms of the people that you represent, the members of in the freelancing industry, what are they thinking about in terms of why they cast their vote for a particular individual or party?
Well, I mean, in European terms, they will be looking for a party that understands the concept of freelance business.
Do any of them?
Well, yes, I would say that some of them do, and I think the UK political parties are actually much better at this than some of their European partners. There are some European parties which are just completely hostile to the whole concept of somebody working on their own or working as a business on their own. But of course, each of the UK parties is in an alliance with other European groups, and they have to win the arguments within those groups. So if the pro-business, pro-freelance UK parties do badly, then our voice in Europe is going to be a lot less, the pro-business voice. And then that has a knock-on effect onto who will be the new president of the Commission, who will get all the portfolios, Whoever wins these elections, whichever faction wins it, will probably produce the president, and that will flavour the whole work of the Commission over the next 5 years. So it is important for British business, very important.
I think Simon's right. And what's interesting when you go to Brussels is you realise it's not just about policies being driven by the European Commission. There is a different mindset, you know, and politicians in different member states, you know, and at a European level will be driven in some ways by that mindset. So there is still scepticism, isn't there, about anything that's not a permanent full-time job. And we see it in our sector. So, for example, we represent recruitment agencies. If you go and try, if you wanted to go and open a recruitment agency in Italy, you couldn't just do that. You'd have to have 4 offices in different regions in Italy. That would be the restriction. If you wanted to go and do business in other countries, you cannot supply temporary workers into the public sector. So there's all sorts of real restrictions on what we'd consider flexible staffing, which in our view have to be lifted. So we work with our European Federation to do that, but it's going to take time.
I mean, there are parties in the European Parliament that are totally hostile to business, totally anti-business.
So why is that? Because they don't understand the concept
Well, because
of it?
their philosophy is that business is there to exploit the workers, and therefore they want to regulate, they want to protect the workers, and they're not really into sort of free market, sort of free trade type policy.
But also we need to talk about jobs. It's not just about helping business compete. So in every country you go to in Europe, what are some of the big challenges? Long-term unemployment and youth unemployment.
Absolutely.
And that's where we need to focus some of the debate, because politicians are interested now. So they're less interested in businesses in some ways, aren't they? Understanding how business, what the business need, but they are very interested in jobs. And maybe that's one of the
wealth
approaches.
Creation as well. I think wealth creation is very important, and we have to make that argument all the time in Brussels. You know, helping business helps wealth creation, which helps jobs, of course.
Alex, in terms of local elections then, do you think that parties locally, in terms of the candidates that they put up, understand the importance of small businesses and freelancers?
I think they understand the importance of mentioning small business and trying to get the PR that's associated with it. I'm not convinced that they always actually get the importance of small businesses themselves. All will talk about priority, and I think they've got to recognise actually that small businesses are now, I think this year for the first time, business rates will outstrip council tax as a central government treasury income. So I think they've got to recognise where their local source of taxation is coming from, and give them a much better entry into how policies and decisions are made locally. But I'm not sure that the council elections and the way in which councillors are chosen yet really takes enough account of a small business.
I think one of the interesting debates on the local level is how you create the environment, and I mean almost the physical environment to help small businesses succeed. So if you look at a lot of high streets, a lot of empty shops, etc. If you look at some of the work Centre for Cities have done, which is quite interesting, so creating little hubs where people can come together and share ideas. So again, I think that could be quite a strong local issue which might feed to the freelance micro business agenda.
I mean, I've been a councillor myself, and I know that there are very powerful interest groups in your area, and small business tends to be one of the weaker ones. They're not very good at coming to you with their concerns or with what we should be doing, whereas other groups like the schools or the charities or whatever are much more organised, much more vocal. So, I mean, there is maybe something that small businesses need to look at in the way they organise at a local level.
I am surprised though, because I would have thought that, well, the sense I get from all of you is that you don't think that the outcome of the local elections or the politicking that's going to go on in the run-up to the local elections is actually going to have much impact when it comes to freelancers or small businesses.
I think at the local level, I mean, obviously local government does take on a lot of freelancers, and that is important. I don't think that's going to change particularly whoever's running the town hall, to be honest. But the policies that really affect our members are really made in Brussels around employment law and in the Treasury in Whitehall. So in that way, the European and the general election is going to be much more significant for our members.
I think on the local level for us, it's about how we actually draw the link. So what is important on a local level? Schools, hospitals, etc. But underpinning that, what makes a successful school and what makes an effective, efficient hospital is the staff that are in that hospital. So again, for us, it's drawing out that link about the benefits of well-qualified, flexible staffing that can be brought in at short notice, for example, into our schools, into our hospitals. So sometimes we need to build those links, draw the link to policies in some ways which might go against that. So we have a running battle in some ways, like promoting the benefits of flexible staffing at a time when people are looking to cut costs. And ultimately that has an impact on frontline services, which is of interest to people. So I think part of our work as professional bodies is to draw those links out. For us anyway, it's about highlighting the importance of getting the right staff, because that's what makes these organisations breathe.
Did you say earlier, Simon, that you felt that the small business voice wasn't loud enough when it comes to local politics?
Yes, I mean, this is my experience, and it's maybe over 10 years ago since I was a councillor, but I feel that, you're getting a lot of representation from a lot of different groups, and some of them are quite emotional, anything to do with charities or childcare or anything like that, and that is more powerful for you than maybe your local business, although you do have your local chambers of commerce and groups like that which do engage with you, but it's just they don't have the kind of powerful emotional punch that some of these other groups would have.
Alex, would you agree?
I think it's an entirely fair point. I mean, part of the problem you have with a small business is simply because of the size of it. It's issues that tend to be very local, down to its street level, and problems it's facing in its particular street. And if you look at somewhere like I use Northampton as an example because it's where I'm from, but you have Barclaycard headquarters there, employing hundreds, if not thousands of people. And obviously, as far as the local councillor goes, that has much more sway on where they might direct some of their policies than the small business, which actually is quite a divided voice. And my experience of politicians at all levels is that if they can put a piece of paper between different conflicting views from businesses, then they will do.
I mean, in my area, we had a new Tesco's opening, and the Tesco's had a coordinated campaign with the local councillors and the local community in a way that a small business could never do.
Let's move on and talk about the referendum on Scottish independence, which, unless you've been living under a stone, you'll be aware is happening in September. Simon, we know there are over 150,000 freelancers and almost 300,000 self-employed people operating in Scotland. So, I mean, obviously we can't talk about the result at this point, we don't know what it's going to be, but all the politicking that there has been up till now, what's been the effect on small businesses and freelancers so far?
Well, I mean, again, I think there's a certain amount of uncertainty. I think that there's lots of conflicting views out there at the moment.
Which is completely inevitable, though,
well,
isn't
it is inevitable. I mean, we know what the government's saying about the pound. We know what the President of the European Commission is saying about Scotland being in the EU. The Scottish Nationalist Government is saying something different, so you have to make a judgment on that. I mean, what we have to do as an organisation that's got 10% of our members in Scotland, and the oil and gas industry is very important to us, we have to have dialogue with both sides, and we do, and we've talked to the Scottish Government about what freelancing would be like under a Scottish Government, and they're very open to it, and they're not saying anything that alarms me particularly, but it's not 100% clear either, because it's all a bit fuzzy rather than clearly what it would be like. But as I say, there's nothing they're saying that alarms me. And then on the other side, well, we've talked to the Labour Party up there, both when they were in government and now in opposition, and they've always been very open to us as well. So, I mean, from that point of view, I think we as PCG are quite well positioned in Scotland. But again, it's all this uncertainty. It's just not good for business. So I think people are a little bit nervous about what may happen.
How far up is it on a freelancer's list of worries? Let's face there are quite a few of them.
Well, in Scotland, I think it is at the top.
Right.
Like everybody in Scotland is talking about this. And we've had, some meetings up there, and they've been very well attended, and people are very, well, certainly asking very good questions around the issues. But freelancers, they quite often move around the country. Their business may be based in Scotland, but they could be working in the south. So for them, there are some issues here. Will you still be able to do that? Will you be able to move around freely? Will you be able to, get expenses out of the border? What taxation system will you use? Will you use the rest of the UK or Scotland? then these are issues that haven't been answered yet.
Yeah.
I think the feedback from our members, perhaps slightly different actually.
Yeah.
The jobs market, as in other places, is really picking up in Scotland. So people are getting on with the job of placing people into work, which is great news. I suppose what members have got is a series of questions. So again, we stay neutral on the debate, but there are things that need to be considered when we look at what's the outlook for the jobs market. If I'm a business, I've got sites in Scotland and in England, how will that work out? Also questions about, as a trade body, will you continue to provide service to us in Scotland if there is independence? So, and yes, we would. So all these are questions that we need to consider moving forward. I think whatever happens, there'll be quite significant time to put things in place. So there is a message of reassurance to the members there, but certainly for our sector, a lot of it's the here and now at the moment. It's the jobs market's picking up. Let's get people into work, and let's have confidence that our trade body's doing the right thing in terms of starting to prepare for every eventuality.
Yeah, Alex, same kind of concerns from people you talk to?
I mean, yeah, equally as an organisation, we have to stay neutral on this. I mean, the polling that we've done with some of our members in Scotland suggests there is a bias towards staying within the union, but equally there is a preference of Scottish government in the devolved responsibilities that it has. It prefers a way that the Scottish government deals with those than the UK government deals with the general powers, which is quite interesting. I think all I can do is echo what Simon said. So the problem for us is there's a muddled view as to what an outcome will be in any particular area, and the EU is a very good example of that. There should be a set system in place that says there's enough agitation within other countries in the continent that separation has to have been considered before. So if a country does become separate, is it going to automatically be a member? If it's not going to be, how long is the process going to be? What kind of support does it require? And I mean, the one negative I would point towards the in-campaign from those campaigning for it is simply that it does seem a little bit negative at times. If Scotland did become independent and voted to become independent, for us to then say, well, they've got no support from the EU member state seems quite negative. I'd much rather they were coming out and say, well, look, if that's the choice of the Scottish people, we will back them to become members of the EU.
It is interesting, though, the European angle. So we just got back from our Eurosix, the European Confederation meeting in Spain, and they're looking very, very closely at what's happening in Scotland because of what that could create in terms of the Catalonian independence movement. So I think it's interesting is you think this is our little debate here, but no, everybody's really, really focused on this.
I have an apartment in Barcelona, and I know they are watching Scotland very, very carefully, and whatever Scotland does will have a profound effect in Spain.
Yeah.
Well, it's very useful to know. I'm just noting it down that you've got an apartment in Barcelona. Sorry. Do you think, though, that it's inevitable that when you have two very passionate sides putting forward their case for and against independence, that there will be a lack of clarity? Or do you think that the debate could be a bit clearer?
Well, we don't have many referendums in this country, to be honest. So I'm not really an expert in this. I mean, we had the one over the voting system, and I think both sides argued the other side were lying, basically, in that one as well.
Yeah.
So it may well be that this is what happens in referendums, that the issues get cloudy, etc.
But have there been specific points where you feel, any of you feel that actually the answer here is quite clear? I don't really understand why it's not being argued that way, because it gives businesses a bit more clarity. If X happens, then Y will happen, and if X doesn't happen, then Z will happen.
I think the currency is a crucial issue, and I don't. Well, I mean, who do you believe? You have the three major parties in this country saying that Scotland can't have the pound, and you have the Scots not saying, well, we've done an independent commission, and they say we can.
Yeah.
Who do you believe? That's a judgment. But it is a crucial question for business, no doubt.
And the European one as well. So our members across the whole of the UK are very much in favour of a dynamic, pan-European, open jobs market. So what would that mean to the Scottish independence, to the whole European culture? That is, again, one of the questions that is at the forefront.
Let's move on then and talk about the general election, which of course is next year. If we look at the three main parties, although who knows who the three main parties are anymore. How does it look for them in terms of how committed, or how much change or how much help they want to give to the freelancing industry and small businesses. Alex, what do you think?
It's a very slow process for parties to develop policies. You've seen the Labour Party that's been in opposition now for 4 years, and it's only really reaching the point now where it's beginning to make some specific announcements. For instance, freezing business rates, cutting and freezing business rates, and paying for that through postponement of a cutting corporation tax. It's emerging slowly. Some of it is positive, some of it is not positive. The two parties in coalition are beginning to set up, or have set up now, policy committees that are beginning to look at manifestos. So, without wanting a get-out clause, it's a kind of question that is more easily answered in probably 4 or 5 months' time. I think all of them will really play the small business hand strongly. I think the coalition government really feels it's done a lot in the area of deregulation, employment law for micros. I think the Labour government might well play a little bit more on the costs of doing business, but with the economy picking up, everything's really up in the air.
Well, from our freelancer point of view, we would say that this government's been disappointing. It hasn't done what it said it was going to do.
Remind us what that was.
Well, in terms of the IR35 review, they led us to believe that they were going to abolish it, and they didn't. And I don't think that they've actually deregulated the economy as much as we would have hoped. So therefore, I would suggest the small business vote is actually up for grabs this time round. I don't think the Conservatives can take it for granted at all. But I don't think they've 100% lost it yet. They've got this year to prove, and maybe to have some more small business friendly policies. But Labour are saying some interesting things, especially about small micro businesses. But it doesn't sit very well with their anti-big business rhetoric. And I don't think small micro businesses can be anti-big business, because that's where we get most of our work from. So Labour's maybe a little bit unbalanced in its tune it's singing. It may be that it doesn't all add up what they're saying, but certainly they are, in my terms, saying some interesting things about our area.
Tom?
Yeah, I think all the parties get it. They understand that helping small business, micro business, helping freelancers is key to economic prosperity, etc. They also understand, certainly for small micro business, that it's jobs. And it's interesting, so our last Jobs Outlook survey shows 67% of employees in this country are planning to hire more staff in the next 3 months. And a lot of that is driven by micro businesses, which is interesting. So if you look at the whole jobs debate, I think people get that. I think one of the areas that we're interested in, so yes, you can talk about regulation, talk about taxation. One of the barriers to growth that we're seeing is skills, actually. So people want to hire. What we're also seeing in some of our surveys is the availability of candidates at a 15-year low. So employers are saying we want to hire, but we can't find the right skills. So what we do need for all the policies is to develop policies, all the parties develop policies which help us to bridge that skills disconnect, which we know is there in our jobs market.
What is the main thing that each of you would call for, if you could, for the next government to do to help the people that you represent? If there was one thing. Simon, you're laughing. Just one thing.
Surprises, Simon. Surprises.
And from our point of view, it has to be a review of the tax system, and it has to focus in on small micro businesses and tax them in a fair way. And that's always going to be our number one issue.
But the thing is, someone can say they're going to do it and then not do it.
Yes, they can say they're going to do it.
Maybe you should aim lower.
Well, we will be wanting other things as well, of course. But I think that this is something. It's not just us, by the way. There's a lot of tax experts, a lot of very distinguished Oxford professors, whatever, who agree with us. But it takes a lot of guts for a government to do that sort of thing, and a lot of time as well. It's not a one-term government thing.
Alex, what about you? What's the main thing you would call for, if you could, for the next government to do to help?
I mean, of course, there are issues in finance, tax, energy, rates. If it was going to be one, then I will focus on employment law, and I would make a call for the next government, whichever colour coalition it might be, to make a commitment to regulate just once during a parliament in an area of employment law. And to take as an example, the issue of parental leave, which everyone accepts is a good thing, it's changed every 18 months since 2004. And there's just no incentive for businesses to try and get on top of the regulations themselves. Instead, they tend to outsource it, which can be quite expensive sometimes. For us, it would just be a much better situation if there was a clear pipeline, a commitment to regulate once. That business would then be incentivised to really understand those regulations itself and follow them properly.
A lot of government politicians think we mustn't cut regulation, and yes, businesses welcome that in the main, but often it isn't just about cutting. It's about good regulation, which is clear, consistent, not changing. Change in itself can create a problem, can't it? Even if you're slightly scraping things away. It's about consistency and effective enforcement. So for us, our business don't mind a bit of regulation as long as everybody's playing by the same rules. Absolutely. I think the fundamental message to any political party, whatever you announce as a policy, it's got to be backed up by some effective enforcement mechanisms on the ground. So the good guys, the good agencies, the good employees who are doing the right thing, meeting their requirements, aren't undercut by people who are doing nothing of that. So there's a real mindset change. So it's not just about saying stuff and do. It's about have you got the machine underneath, which makes this stuff work on the ground. So that would be one of our messages. I suppose our other key would be on the skills agenda. So we do need to look at long-term initiatives. We need to go back into schools. For us, we've always advocated a fit-for-purpose careers and guidance network in schools. So we can preempt where the jobs of the future are going to be, so we can push people encourage people to go into the right direction, as well as looking at some of the short-term measures that we do need to help businesses to compete. And for us, that involves the immigration debate, which is hugely politically sensitive.
Yeah.
But we know for our members in engineering, technology, yes, we need to look at the long term, how we build bridges into work for young people. But we do need to access skills now to seize new market opportunities. Again, that's a whole other debate. Perhaps
another time, absolutely, yeah. What about late payment, tackling late payment? That's very important as well, isn't it?
It is important. I mean, it's an issue that we've been talking about for years, really. I mean, we've come to the conclusion that the government will have to legislate and force the big companies to pay on time. But whether there's a will to do that, I don't know. We've got to be careful as well, because of course these are our customers. But I mean, some of them really behave in a very bad way, actually government's one of the worst offenders in this. So whether government will legislate to make them pay on time, I don't know. But I mean, maybe Alex has got more views on this than I do.
I'll stand up a little bit for government here and say that actually they've improved their payment times quite a lot. I think some of their problems tend to be enforcing those prompt payment times further down their supply chain. With their prime contractors, that tends to be the issue. But there are certainly things the government could do. Legislating is one thing. We'd like to see a little bit more onus on companies reporting their payment times and practices when they submit their annual reports. And also, there's a fairly new EU late payment directive that's come in. Without wanting to get boringly technical, there is an obligation under Article 7 of that governments should provide a mechanism through which businesses can remain anonymous when they're reporting late payment, and do it through organisations like the Form of Private Business or whatever their rep bodies might be, and we'll take on the case for them. But at present, that mechanism doesn't exist in the UK. So they could work out what that should be, and that would be quite an effective way of businesses being able to tackle, because anonymity is key, because businesses where they lose contract that they can play.
So there is a role for government. There's also a role for the business community itself. So we hear a lot about responsible business, don't we? So the CBI, who we all work with, on different projects, are launching a big campaign on reputation of business. And surely, if the aim is to enhance the reputation of business, part of that has to be how we deal with our suppliers. So treat suppliers with a little bit of respect. Actually treat freelancers with a little bit of respect, and pay them promptly. For our sector, it's huge. So if I run a temp agency, I have to pay, even if I'm not getting paid for it. So the cash flow issues in our sector are more acute than many others. So we recommend, we welcome some of the government initiatives, but it is about pushing that sort of good business agenda to ensure that the business community itself, treats each other with a bit more respect sometimes.
How likely is it that would happen, or do you still think there needs to be an element of compulsion?
Well, there are members of Parliament who are really working very hard on this and have campaigns up and running, but at the end of the day, it is going to be the government that's going to have to make the decision in this and be brave. And whether that's going to happen, I don't know.
Is this something, just quickly, that the people that you speak to and represent are 100% for legislating against late payment?
Well, I think it's the only solution they can see. I wouldn't say it's 100%. I would say they can't think of another way. Now, legislation is always a last resort, but I think we're getting to that sort of time now.
Okay. Well, thank you to all of you. Thanks
you.
very much for all the issues that we explored today. That is all we have got time for today. Thank you for watching, and thank you to our panellists, to Tom Hadley, Simon McVicker and Alex Jackman. And join us for PCG Live next month, when we'll be discussing what's really happening in the economy and whether freelancers do have a reason to celebrate. Goodbye.